There are windmills all over Europe. There are windmills all over the place, and they are losers.
Donald Trump once called wind energy a con job. Some oil executives have questioned whether certain offshore projects can deliver strong returns. And when a major component fails miles out at sea, repairs can cost millions. The American wind industry, backed by roughly $100 billion in investment, didn't suddenly collapse. But by 2023, it started facing some serious turbulence. It's a staggering shift for an industry that grew rapidly from the 1990s to supply about 10% of America's electricity by 2023. Yet momentum slowed as companies reconsidered projects, manufacturers disclosed costly equipment issues, and policymakers introduced new uncertainty. In December 2025, the Trump administration suspended new large offshore wind leases pending national security review, a decision that sent shockwaves through the sector. So what's really happening inside America's wind build-out? Who or what is responsible? And is this a temporary slowdown or a warning sign of deeper structural problems? Modern offshore wind turbines are among the largest machines ever constructed. Today's leading models generate roughly 12 to 15 megawatts each, enough to power thousands of homes depending on conditions. Their blades stretch longer than a football field, engineered to capture steady ocean winds with remarkable efficiency. Projects like Virginia's Coastal Virginia offshore wind development were designed to supply electricity to fast-growing regions where demand, driven partly by data centers, continues to surge. By the mid-2000s, major components were already being installed offshore, but building turbines turned out to be only half the challenge. Delivering that electricity required something less visible and far harder to expand: the power grid. Across the United States, thousands of renewable projects have applied to connect to transmission networks. In many regions, approval can take years. Developers are often required to help fund large infrastructure upgrades: transmission lines, substations, transformers, sometimes adding hundreds of millions to project costs. Supporters argue these upgrades are essential for reliability. Critics say the delays create financial uncertainty few investors are willing to tolerate. PJM Interconnection, which operates the largest regional grid stretching from Illinois to New Jersey, became so overwhelmed by connection requests that in 2022, it announced a freeze on new applications until 2026. The backlog contained thousands of proposals, mostly for renewable energy. The approval process now averages roughly 4 years, double the time from a decade earlier. And when companies finally receive review, they often face another hurdle. The local grid is at capacity. They're required to spend far more than originally planned for new transmission infrastructure. Fewer than 1 in 5 solar and wind proposals actually make it through the interconnection queue. Meanwhile, other regions expanded faster. China scaled turbine manufacturing while building transmission alongside generation. European countries coordinated grid planning across borders to support offshore growth. The United States has vast wind resources, but expanding the infrastructure to carry that power has proven far more complicated. The network of power lines and transformers that moves electricity from generation sites to cities and factories isn't a single system. It's more than 60 overlapping regional networks operated by various authorities, many involving private corporations that must balance public service with financial viability. For some developers, time became the most expensive obstacle of all. Donald Trump has criticized wind turbines for over a decade. The opposition began in 2013 when he launched a legal battle against Scottish authorities over 11 turbines visible from his Turnberry Golf Resort. The case dragged through courts for years before the UK Supreme Court dismissed it in 2015. He lost, but the stance remained. During campaign stops and press conferences, Trump described turbines as ugly monsters that ruin beautiful fields and valleys. He claimed they kill birds and whales, cause cancer, and drive up electricity costs. At his Turnberry Resort in Scotland, he told reporters the turbines were some of the ugliest windmills you've ever seen. Then came the policy hammer. In December 2025, the Trump administration suspended all large offshore wind leases currently under construction. The official reason: classified national security risks identified by the Department of Defense. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum claimed turbines create radar interference that makes it impossible to distinguish friend or foe in American airspace, especially near East Coast population centers and major airports. The announcement cited recently completed classified reports, but provided no specific details. Virginia Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, who serve on the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committees, issued a joint statement saying the administration had failed to share any new information, justifying the sudden pause. They added that silence speaks volumes, especially given the president's long-standing, well-documented opposition to offshore wind. The radar interference concern isn't entirely without precedent. In 2024, Sweden blocked wind farm construction over similar worries amid heightened tensions with Russia. Sweden's military said the radar couldn't see through the spinning blades, but experts note that wind farm designs can be adjusted to account for radar issues, and U.S. government officials have been aware of potential conflicts for decades. The Department of Defense has signed off on every offshore wind lease ahead of construction for over 10 years. While the radar issue represents a legitimate military concern, Trump's opposition to wind power extends beyond national security. He said turbines rust and rot in 8 years. The average lifespan of a wind turbine is 20 to 25 years, with some modern turbines operating for 30 years or more. Scotland's oldest onshore wind farm, built in 1998, is still producing electricity and was repowered in 2023. He called wind the most expensive energy ever. Globally, wind power is now 53% cheaper than the lowest cost fossil fuel alternative. Onshore wind costs have plummeted 56% since 2010. He claimed turbines are made in China, almost all of them. China does manufacture 60% of global turbine capacity, but 90% of commissioned wind projects in Europe use European-made turbines. The U.S. has significant domestic manufacturing capability that remains underutilized. He said turbines kill whales and birds. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration found no evidence linking offshore wind farms to whale deaths. Ship strikes and fishing gear entanglement cause far more whale fatalities. Wind turbines do kill some birds, but cats, power lines, buildings, and climate change itself kill exponentially more. He even claimed Germany tried wind energy and it failed. In reality, wind power accounted for 28% of Germany's electricity generation in 2024, making it the country's largest single source of electricity. Renewables overall made up nearly 60% of Germany's energy mix. The suspension hit hardest in states that had committed heavily to offshore wind. Massachusetts saw a Shell joint venture pull out of a massive contract just days after CEO Wael Sawan announced the company wouldn't build renewable projects earning less than 6% to 8% returns. Virginia's Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin had pushed offshore wind to power the state's booming data center industry. Now the project sat frozen at 60% completion. New England faced an energy trap. The region sits at the end of America's natural gas pipelines and relies on ocean tankers for much of its supply. Offshore wind was supposed to provide energy independence. That plan evaporated. The grid crisis and political hostility created a perfect economic storm, but the technical failures made it catastrophic. Siemens Gamesa's troubles revealed flawed rotor blades and bearings across up to 30% of the 132 gigawatts of turbine capacity it had installed worldwide. The defects started small: microscopic cracks in the composite resin of turbine blades, hairline fractures invisible to the naked eye. Over months of rotation at sea, these cracks spread through the fiberglass like spiderwebs. Inside the nacelle, the housing atop each tower, bearings began to fail. The low grinding hum of a healthy turbine shifted to a metallic screech as steel races wore down. The bearings that allow blades to pitch and yaw, adjusting to wind direction with millimeter precision, started to seize. These weren't minor defects you could patch during routine maintenance. Component failures required replacing entire turbines, not just parts. Offshore repairs are nightmares. Virginia's turbines sit 27 miles into the Atlantic Ocean. Accessing them requires specialized vessels, weather windows, and enormous expense. A single bearing replacement can exceed $8 million when you factor in jack-up barge rentals at $150,000 per day, weather delays, and specialized crews. Multiply that scenario across hundreds of turbines showing similar defects, and the financial damage starts to make sense. The interconnection trap compounded everything. Companies lease ocean territory, invest billions in turbines and foundations, complete construction, then wait 4 years to connect to a grid that demands another $200 million in upgrades. Projects bleed money while sitting idle. Investors demand returns, interest rates climb, supply chain inflation hits. Shell's ultimatum captured the reality. No projects under 6% returns. When you combine high borrowing costs, grid delays, political uncertainty, and potential equipment failures, the math stops working. Trump called it a con job. The Siemens quality disaster and those $8 million repair costs revealed real engineering and economic problems. America's wind sector ran into constraints: aging grid infrastructure, complex permitting, rising costs, and security concerns colliding at once. The technology remains impressive. The question is whether the system around it can scale fast enough. So was offshore wind the future, or a gamble that proved harder than expected? And if wind slows down, what fills the gap? Big tech and policymakers are already turning their attention to a power source once considered too dangerous. In our next investigation, we explore the surprising return of nuclear energy and why some believe the atom may be entering a new era. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And tell us in the comments, is American offshore wind headed for a comeback? Or perhaps entering a long slowdown?